Abstract. Compassion, the capacity to notice, empathize with, and respond to suffering, represents a vital yet often overlooked organizational capability. This article examines how compassionate workplace cultures influence both organizational performance and employee well-being, drawing on established research and emerging practitioner insights. We explore the organizational and individual consequences of compassion deficits, including elevated stress, burnout, and reduced engagement. The article presents evidence-based interventions spanning leadership development, structural supports, and cultural initiatives that organizations can implement to build compassionate capacity. By integrating compassion into strategic planning, governance structures, and daily operations, organizations can foster environments where both people and performance thrive. The synthesis offered here aims to guide practitioners in creating workplaces that acknowledge human vulnerability while maintaining operational excellence. #Introduction. The modern workplace presents a paradox. While organizations increasingly recognize that employee well-being drives performance, many work environments remain characterized by high pressure, limited support, and insufficient acknowledgement of human suffering. Economic volatility, technological disruption, and evolving workforce expectations have created conditions where employees regularly experience significant stress, yet organizational responses often remain inadequate or absent. Compassion in organizational settings refers to the process through which individuals and groups notice colleagues suffering, empathize with their experience, and take action to alleviate distress, wellbeing 2022. Unlike sympathy or pity, compassion involves concrete behavioral responses. It transforms awareness into meaningful support. This distinction matters because organizational cultures can either enable or inhibit compassionate responses, with measurable consequences for both individual well-being and collective performance. The strategic imperative for compassionate organizations has intensified. Employees increasingly evaluate employers not only on compensation and career opportunities but also on how organizations treat people during difficult times, whether personal crises, organizational change, or external shocks. Organizations that cultivate compassionate cultures may be better positioned to attract talent, sustain engagement, and maintain resilience during disruption. This article examines the evidence base for organizational compassion, explores its consequences, and outlines practical interventions that organizations can implement. While the research foundation continues to develop, sufficient evidence exists to guide practitioners in building more compassionate and more effective organizations. #The organizational compassion landscape. Defining compassion in the workplace context. Organizational compassion encompasses both interpersonal dynamics and systemic capabilities. At the interpersonal level, compassion involves one person noticing another's suffering, emotionally connecting with that experience, and responding with helpful action, wellbeing 2022. However, compassion extends beyond individual acts to organizational systems, practices, and cultures that either facilitate or constrain compassionate responses. Research distinguishes compassion from related constructs. Empathy involves understanding others' emotional states but may not lead to action. Sympathy reflects concern but can maintain emotional distance. Compassion, by contrast, combines emotional resonance with behavioral response. It bridges feeling and doing, Gilbert, 2019. This action orientation makes compassion particularly relevant for organizational contexts where abstract concern holds limited value unless translated into tangible support. Organizations express compassion through multiple mechanisms. Individual leaders and colleagues provide direct support, listening, offering flexibility, or sharing resources. Teams develop norms that legitimize vulnerability and mutual assistance. Organizational structures create policies, programs, and practices that systematize compassionate responses rather than leaving support to individual discretion or chance. The compassion process unfolds in phases. Noticing suffering requires attention and psychological safety that allows people to reveal struggles. Empathizing demands perspective-taking capacity and emotional bandwidth. Responding effectively requires resources, authority, and organizational enabling conditions. Breakdowns can occur at any phase. Some organizations fail to notice employee distress due to hierarchical distance or cultures that reward stoicism. Others notice but lack empathy due to time pressure or emotional exhaustion. Still others empathize but cannot respond due to rigid policies or resource constraints. State of workplace compassion. Evidence regarding compassion prevalence in contemporary organizations remains limited, though available indicators suggest considerable variation across organizations and sectors. Employee surveys frequently reveal that many workers feel their organizations provide insufficient support during difficult times, though specific metrics vary by industry, organization size, and measurement approach. Several factors appear to influence organizational compassion capacity. Work intensity affects whether employees have bandwidth to notice colleagues' struggles and respond supportively. Psychological safety determines whether people feel comfortable revealing vulnerabilities that might otherwise remain hidden. Leadership modeling signals whether compassionate behavior receives organizational validation or represents deviation from performance norms. Sector differences likely exist. Healthcare, education, and social services explicitly incorporate care into professional identity, potentially supporting compassionate norms. Yet these sectors also experience high burnout rates that may compromise compassion capacity, Benavine et al. 2022. Commercial sectors may face different dynamics. Some organizations cultivate supportive cultures as competitive differentiators while others maintain performance-focused environments where compassion receives limited attention. Organizational life cycle stages and circumstances matter. Established organizations with stable resources may find compassion easier to sustain than startups operating under resource constraints and existential pressure. Yet crises can also catalyze compassion. Research on organizational responses to traumatic events suggests that shared adversity sometimes strengthens compassionate capacity when organizations explicitly mobilize supportive responses, or Lilius et al. 2011. Contemporary workplace trends create both opportunities and challenges for organizational compassion. Remote and hybrid work arrangements may reduce informal opportunities to notice colleagues' struggles while potentially offering flexibility that supports compassion in other ways. Increased workforce diversity expands the range of experiences and needs organizations must recognize and address. Growing attention to employee well-being creates openings for compassion-focused initiatives, though whether organizations implement substantive changes or superficial programs varies considerably. Organizational and individual consequences of compassion. Organizational performance impacts. The relationship between organizational compassion and performance outcomes appears complex and context-dependent. Available evidence suggests compassionate work environments may influence several organizational outcomes, though effect sizes and mechanisms require continued investigation. Employee engagement represents one documented association. Research indicates that when employees perceive their organizations as compassionate, they often report high commitment and discretionary effort, Aldor and Shoshani, 2016. The proposed mechanism involves reciprocity. Employees who receive organizational support during difficult times may feel motivated to contribute beyond minimum requirements. Additionally, compassionate environments may reduce anxiety and cognitive distraction associated with unacknowledged suffering, freeing mental resources for productive work. Retention patterns suggest that compassionate cultures may influence turnover. Employees who experience organizational support during personal crises, health issues, family emergencies, or other difficulties, may develop stronger organizational attachment than those who navigate such challenges without organizational acknowledgement or accommodation. However, the strength of this relationship likely depends on numerous factors including labor market conditions, career stage, and individual values. Team effectiveness may benefit from compassionate dynamics. When team members feel safe acknowledging struggles and confident they will receive support rather than judgment, they may collaborate more openly and recover more quickly from setbacks, West et al. 2015. Teams characterized by compassionate norms may also experience less interpersonal conflict and more constructive problem-solving, though research continues to explore these connections. Innovation capacity represents another potential outcome. Some evidence suggests that organizations where people feel psychologically safe, a condition related to compassion, may generate more creative ideas because employees feel comfortable proposing novel approaches without fear of ridicule if ideas prove unsuccessful, West, 2021. Compassionate environments might also support the experimentation and learning from failure that innovation requires, though this relationship needs further investigation. The business case for compassion requires nuanced consideration. While compassionate practices may enhance performance through the mechanisms described, they also require investment, leader training, program development, and flexibility that may create short-term costs or complexity. Organizations must determine whether compassion represents a strategic priority warranting such investment rather than viewing it as a guaranteed performance accelerator. Individual well-being and broader stakeholder impacts. Compassionate organizational environments appear to influence employee psychological and physical health through multiple pathways. When organizations acknowledge and respond to employee suffering, they may reduce the compound stress of managing difficulties while maintaining the appearance that everything is fine, a dynamic that can intensify distress and undermine well-being. Benevinadal 2022. Burnout represents one significant concern. Research indicates that emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy, the core burnout dimensions, may be influenced by organizational support or its absence. Employees facing challenging circumstances without adequate support may deplete emotional resources, potentially leading to burnout trajectories that affect both well-being and performance. Buenomo 2022. Conversely, compassionate responses might help replenish emotional resources and sustain engagement during difficult periods. Stress physiology provides another lens. When employees experience suffering without adequate support, chronic stress responses may activate with potential implications for cardiovascular health, immune function, and other physiological systems. While organizational compassion alone cannot eliminate stress, appropriate support might moderate stress intensity and duration with meaningful health implications over time. Mental health outcomes merit attention given rising prevalence of anxiety and depression. Organizational environments that acknowledge psychological struggles and provide supportive responses might reduce stigma and facilitate earlier intervention. However, organizations must recognize the limits of workplace compassion. Serious mental health conditions require professional treatment rather than relying solely on colleague or supervisor support. Work-life integration presents ongoing challenges that compassionate organizational responses might address. Employees managing caregiving responsibilities, health issues, or other personal demands while maintaining employment face competing obligations that can generate significant distress. Organizational flexibility, resource provision, and acknowledgement of these realities may help employees navigate such challenges more successfully. The effects of organizational compassion extend beyond employees to other stakeholders. In service settings, healthcare, education, and similar contexts, employee well-being influences the quality of care and service delivery. Staff experiencing burnout or distress may have reduced capacity for empathy and attention that affects patient care, student learning, or customer experience. Thus, organizational compassion toward employees may indirectly benefit those they serve. Westadal 2015. Evidence-based organizational responses. Leadership development and modeling. Leadership behavior significantly influences whether compassionate organizational cultures emerge and persist. When leaders demonstrate compassionate responses, noticing employee struggles, expressing genuine concern, and providing concrete support, they signal that such behavior receives organizational validation. Conversely, leaders who ignore employee difficulties or respond punitively establish norms that suppress compassionate behavior throughout the organization. Effective compassionate leadership involves several capabilities. Noticing requires attention and presence. Leaders must create sufficient space in their work to observe employee well-being rather than focusing exclusively on task completion. Empathizing demands perspective taking and emotional attunement that allows leaders to understand experiences different from their own. Responding effectively requires both authority to provide support and skill in matching responses to circumstances rather than applying uniform solutions. Evidence-based approaches to developing compassionate leadership include training and skill development. Self-awareness practices that help leaders recognize their own emotional patterns and biases that might interfere with compassionate responses. Perspective-taking exercises that develop capacity to understand diverse employee experiences and challenges. Communication skills training focused on expressing genuine concern and support rather than minimizing difficulties or offering superficial reassurance. Decision-making frameworks that incorporate well-being considerations alongside operational priorities. Structural supports. Time allocation that allows leaders to maintain awareness of team member well-being rather than focusing exclusively on task management. Authority and resources to provide flexible arrangements, additional support, or other accommodations when employees face difficulties. Clear organizational policies that guide appropriate compassionate responses while maintaining boundaries and fairness. Protected time for leader self-care to prevent emotional exhaustion that compromises compassion capacity. Healthcare organizations have developed leadership programs emphasizing these competencies. Leaders participate in workshops exploring compassionate care principles, engage in reflective practice examining their responses to staff distress, and receive coaching to develop skills, West et al. 2015. Such programs recognize that compassionate leadership represents learned capability rather than fixed personality trait. Most leaders can develop greater compassion capacity with appropriate development and support. Financial services organizations face different dynamics but similar leadership imperatives. In high-pressure commercial environments, leaders must balance performance demands with employee well-being. Some organizations have implemented leadership development emphasizing sustainable performance, achieving results while maintaining team health over time rather than driving short-term outcomes at the expense of long-term capacity. Leaders learn to recognize early signs of excessive stress, initiate supportive conversations, and adjust workload or expectations when appropriate. Technology companies with distributed workforces face particular challenges in compassionate leadership. When teams work remotely, leaders lack informal opportunities to observe employee well-being. Some organizations have developed structured check-in practices where leaders regularly assess not only task progress but also employee challenges and support needs. These conversations may feel awkward initially but can become normalized when leaders consistently demonstrate genuine interest and helpful responses. The effectiveness of compassionate leadership depends partly on organizational systems that enable rather than constrain supportive responses. Leaders who want to provide flexibility or additional support but lack authority or resources to do so experience frustration that may undermine their compassion capacity. Organizations must ensure that expectations for compassionate leadership align with the authority and resources leaders actually possess. ### Psychological safety and voice. Compassion requires that suffering become visible. People must feel safe revealing struggles rather than concealing difficulties behind professional facades. Psychological safety, defined as the belief that one can express concerns without fear of negative consequences, creates conditions where compassionate processes can begin. West, 2021. Organizations can cultivate psychological safety through practices that normalize vulnerability and reward voice rather than punishing disclosure. Structural mechanisms. Regular check-ins where leaders explicitly invite discussion of challenges and concerns rather than focusing exclusively on progress reports. Anonymous or confidential channels through which employees can raise issues without immediate identification. Clear processes for addressing concerns that demonstrate organizational responsiveness rather than allowing reports to disappear without acknowledgement. Protection against retaliation for raising well-being concerns or requesting support. Cultural interventions. Leader vulnerability modeling where managers acknowledge their own challenges and support needs, demonstrating that struggle represents normal human experience rather than professional failure. Storytelling practices where employees share experiences of receiving organizational support during difficult times, making compassionate norms visible and reinforcing their legitimacy. Language normalization that treats well-being discussions as routine aspects of professional conversation rather than exceptional events. Recognition systems that celebrate supportive behavior and mutual assistance alongside individual achievement. Educational institutions have implemented well-being rounds where staff regularly discuss challenges affecting their work and well-being. Facilitators ensure conversations remain constructive and confidential while identifying common themes that might warrant organizational attention. This practice normalizes acknowledgement of difficulty while creating opportunities for collective problem-solving and mutual support. Manufacturing and production environments face distinct challenges given the nature of work and workforce characteristics. Some organizations have trained frontline supervisors to conduct brief well-being conversations during shift changes or breaks. Supervisors learn to ask open questions, listen without immediate problem-solving, and connect employees with appropriate resources when needs exceed supervisor capacity. While initially uncomfortable for some supervisors, such practices can become valued aspects of team culture when consistently implemented and supported. Professional services firms operating in competitive, high-stakes environments may find psychological safety particularly challenging to establish. Performance pressure and client demands can create cultures where admitting struggle feels risky. Some firms have implemented peer support networks where professionals can confidentially discuss challenges with colleagues outside their immediate teams, reducing concern about manager or client perception while maintaining access to support and perspective. The boundary between appropriate vulnerability and oversharing requires careful consideration. Organizations benefit when people acknowledge difficulties that affect work and seek appropriate support. However, psychological safety should not create expectations that employees disclose private information beyond what they choose or that colleagues substitute for professional support when serious issues require specialized intervention. #Team-based compassion practices. While leader compassion matters, peer support among colleagues may be equally or more important given the frequency of lateral interactions. Teams develop their own norms regarding how members respond to colleague difficulties, whether they offer help, look away, or respond judgmentally. Organizations can influence these team-level dynamics through structured practices and enabling conditions. Evidence-based team compassion approaches include explicit norm development team discussions establishing how members will support one another during difficult times and what kind of assistance people find helpful. Reciprocity practices where team members regularly exchange support around various challenges rather than dividing into helpers and helped. Collective responsibility for work coverage when team members need flexibility or time away due to personal circumstances. Recognition of team compassion as a performance metric rather than treating it as separate from or opposed to productivity. Practical mechanisms coverage protocols that specify how teams redistribute work when members face crises, preventing compassion from depending entirely on voluntary effort that may create resentment. Resource pools or funds that teams can access to provide concrete support such as meals, childcare assistance, or other practical help during difficult periods. Team reflection practices where groups periodically assess how well they support one another and identify improvements. Cross-training that enables team members to temporarily assume others' responsibilities without creating crisis or customer impact. Retail organizations have developed team practices where colleagues collectively support members facing difficulties. When an employee experiences a crisis, team members might adjust schedules to provide coverage, organize meal delivery, or offer practical assistance depending on circumstances. Some retailers formalize such practices through designated team funds that members contribute to and can access during hardship. These systems work best when they incorporate clear guidelines about appropriate use while maintaining flexibility for genuine need. Healthcare teams face ongoing exposure to patient suffering and loss that affects team member well-being. Some clinical teams have instituted brief debriefing practices following particularly difficult cases or patient deaths. Team members share emotional responses, acknowledge the challenge of the work, and offer mutual support. Such practices may help process difficult experiences collectively rather than requiring individuals to manage emotional impact alone. Engineering and technical teams may approach compassion differently given work characteristics and professional cultures. Some technology companies have created help pools where engineers volunteer time to assist colleagues managing heavy workloads or complex challenges. Rather than framing this as compassion, a term some technical cultures might resist, organizations position it as professional collaboration and skill development, though the underlying dynamic involves noticing and responding to colleagues' struggle. The effectiveness of team compassion depends partly on team composition and stability. Teams with consistent membership may develop stronger compassionate capacity over time as members build trust and learn each other's needs. Teams with high turnover or frequent reorganization may struggle to establish compassionate norms before membership changes again. Organizations must consider these dynamics when expecting teams to provide primary compassion capacity. Organizational policies and systems. Beyond individual and team practices, organizational policies and systems either enable or constrain compassionate responses. Employees facing difficulties may receive support from concerned colleagues and supervisors, yet rigid policies or inadequate resources can prevent effective assistance. Organizations committed to compassion must examine whether formal systems align with compassionate values. Key policy domains include flexibility and accommodation leave policies that provide sufficient time away for health issues, family needs, or personal crises without requiring employees to exhaust vacation or face unpaid absence. Work arrangement flexibility allowing temporary schedule adjustments, location changes, or reduced hours when employees face challenges requiring such accommodations. Return to work practices that ease transitions after extended absences rather than expecting immediate full capacity. Clear processes for requesting accommodations that minimize bureaucracy and uncertainty about what support might be available. Support services and resources employee assistance programs offering confidential counseling, resource navigation, and crisis support with adequate capacity and accessibility. Healthcare benefits covering mental health services with parity to physical health care and reasonable cost sharing. Financial assistance programs helping employees manage unexpected expenses associated with crises or hardships. Care services or referrals supporting employees managing family responsibilities such as childcare or elder care. Communication and transparency clear information about available support resources and how to access them without employees needing to navigate complex systems during crises. Regular communication reinforcing that using support represents appropriate behavior rather than weakness or failure. Privacy protections ensuring that employees can access support confidentially without disclosure to managers or colleagues unless the employee chooses to share. Feedback mechanisms allowing employees to report gaps in support or suggest improvements based on lived experience. Financial institutions have developed emergency assistance funds that employees can access during unexpected hardships such as natural disasters, medical crises, or family emergencies. These programs provide rapid financial support through simple application processes, recognizing that bureaucratic complexity during crisis adds stress rather than providing relief. Some organizations fund such programs through employer contributions supplemented by voluntary employee donations, creating collective resource pools that embody organizational compassion through concrete support. Consumer products companies facing seasonal demand fluctuations have implemented flexibility policies allowing employees to adjust schedules based on personal circumstances. Rather than requiring rigid hours, employees work with supervisors to create arrangements meeting both business needs and personal requirements. Such policies recognize that life circumstances create variable demands, parenting responsibilities, health management, elder care, that benefit from accommodation rather than forcing employees to choose between work and personal obligations. Consulting firms have developed return-to-work programs for employees taking extended leave for parenting, health issues, or other reasons. These programs provide gradual reintegration, starting with reduced hours or client responsibilities, while maintaining full benefits during the transition period. The programs acknowledge that jumping immediately back to full capacity after extended absence can be overwhelming and counterproductive, and that some initial investment in gradual return yields better long-term outcomes. The challenge with policy-based compassion involves balancing consistency and flexibility. Clear policies provide predictability and reduce the dependency on individual manager discretion that may yield uneven support. However, overly rigid policies may not accommodate the diverse circumstances employees face. Many organizations therefore establish guidelines rather than absolute rules, providing frameworks that managers apply with judgment tailored to specific situations while maintaining equity and preventing abuse. #Compassion fatigue prevention. Organizations implementing compassionate practices must recognize that providing ongoing support can exhaust those offering assistance. Compassion fatigue, emotional exhaustion resulting from sustained empathy and caregiving, represents a genuine risk, particularly in roles involving regular exposure to others' suffering, Obenavine et al. 2022. Strategies for preventing and addressing compassion fatigue include workload management reasonable caseloads or support responsibilities preventing any individual from becoming overwhelmed by others' needs. Rotation practices where different people provide support over time rather than designating certain individuals as perpetual caregivers. Boundaries around availability and response expectations preventing an always-on dynamic that depletes emotional resources. Administrative time protected for processing difficult interactions rather than moving immediately from one intense situation to another. Emotional support and processing Supervision or peer consultation, providing opportunities to discuss challenging situations and explore emotional responses. Debriefing practices after particularly difficult events or crises, allowing people to process experiences rather than suppressing reactions. Access to confidential counseling, supporting those who regularly provide support to others. Recognition that supporting others generates emotional labor deserving of acknowledgement and organizational appreciation. Skill and capacity building. Training in compassion practices that preserve emotional boundaries and prevent over-identification with others' suffering. Self-care practices supporting the emotional and physical well-being necessary for sustained compassion capacity. Vicarious resilience practices where people identify growth and strength witnessed in others' struggles rather than focusing exclusively on pain and difficulty. Realistic expectations about what support can accomplish, preventing the frustration and self-blame that arise when helpers cannot resolve others' problems. Healthcare systems have long recognized compassion fatigue as an occupational hazard and have developed interventions addressing it. Some hospitals implement Schwartz rounds, structured forums where staff discuss emotional challenges of caregiving in a supportive environment. These sessions normalize emotional responses to difficult clinical situations, provide peer support, and may reduce the isolation that exacerbates compassion fatigue. Participation in such programs appears to help some clinicians sustain compassion capacity over time. Social service organizations face similar dynamics. Case managers, counselors, and other direct service providers routinely encounter clients' suffering and trauma. Some organizations establish maximum caseloads based on acuity, provide weekly clinical supervision focused partly on emotional processing, and offer periodic breaks from the most intensive cases. These practices attempt to sustain worker capacity over entire careers rather than accepting high turnover as inevitable. Corporate employee assistance program counselors face compassion fatigue risks when providing crisis support. Some organizations address this through caseload management, ensuring counselors have time for documentation and recovery between intense sessions, providing regular supervision, and offering counselors their own access to confidential support. The principle involves recognizing that sustainably providing support requires investing in supporter well-being rather than extracting limitless caregiving until burnout occurs. Building long-term compassion capacity. Integrating compassion into organizational strategy. For compassion to become enduring organizational capability rather than temporary initiative, it must integrate into strategic planning, resource allocation, and performance management. Organizations that treat compassion as separate from core business or relegate it to human resources alone may struggle to sustain compassionate practices when competing priorities emerge. Strategic integration involves several practices. Mission and values alignment. Explicit inclusion of compassion or related concepts in organizational mission statements and values, signaling that supporting people represents core purpose rather than peripheral concern. Strategic planning processes that consider employee well-being implications alongside financial, operational, and market factors. Investment decisions that account for compassion capacity as strategic asset rather than viewing all well-being expenditure as pure cost. Risk management frameworks that recognize well-being failures as material risks with potential consequences for performance, reputation, and viability. Governance and accountability. Board or senior leadership oversight of compassion-related metrics and initiatives, establishing executive accountability for outcomes. Regular reporting on well-being indicators alongside financial and operational metrics, treating compassion capacity as aspect of organizational health deserving leadership attention. Succession planning that evaluates leader candidates partly on compassion capability and track record of supporting team well-being. Compensation and promotion decisions incorporating compassion factors rather than rewarding only technical performance or short-term results. Resource allocation. Operating budgets that fund support services, flexibility programs, and other compassion infrastructure rather than treating such investments as discretionary or temporary. Capital allocation for work environment improvements supporting well-being such as appropriate workspace, technology reducing unnecessary stress, or amenities supporting personal needs. Time resources enabling managers and colleagues to provide support without such effort requiring purely voluntary personal time that may prove unsustainable. Innovation funding for pilot programs testing new approaches to organizational compassion. Professional services firms have begun incorporating well-being metrics into partner evaluation and compensation systems. Rather than assessing partners solely on revenue generation and client satisfaction, evaluation includes team member well-being indicators such as sustainable utilization rates, retention, and team feedback about support quality. This structural change signals that building compassionate teams represents core professional responsibility deserving recognition and reward rather than personal optional behavior. Consumer technology companies have established executive-level well-being roles with authority and budget to implement programs, influence policies, and ensure well-being considerations inform major decisions. Unlike traditional HR positions focused primarily on compliance and administration, these roles operate at strategic level, advising on product development decisions, workplace design, and organizational change initiatives to incorporate well-being implications from the outset rather than addressing problems after they emerge. The challenge with strategic integration involves avoiding superficial gestures that maintain appearance of commitment without substantive change. Organizations sometimes adopt compassion language in values statements or marketing while maintaining practices that contradict such values. Authentic integration requires alignment between stated values and actual decisions about resources, recognition, and consequence when compassionate principles conflict with short-term pressures. #distributed compassion capacity. Organizations that concentrate compassion responsibility in certain roles or departments, HR, employee assistants, designated well-being champions, may struggle to build sustainable capacity. While specialized resources provide valuable support, compassion works most effectively when distributed throughout organizations as collective capability rather than centralized function. West, 2021. Building distributed compassion involves broadening responsibility expectation that all leaders and employees share responsibility for noticing and responding to colleagues' struggles rather than delegating such concern to specialists. Job descriptions and performance expectations that explicitly include supportive behavior toward colleagues as core responsibility. Onboarding and training that develops compassion skills across the workforce rather than only for designated roles. Career progression that values and develops compassion capacity rather than tracking only technical expertise or individual achievement. Creating enabling conditions Authority distributed to frontline managers and teams to provide accommodations and support without requiring multiple approval layers. Resource access that allows various organizational levels to respond to needs directly rather than directing all requests through central functions. Information sharing that keeps people throughout organizations aware of available support mechanisms and how to connect colleagues with appropriate resources. Decision rights that empower people closest to situations to make judgment calls about appropriate compassionate responses. Skill development at scale. Broad-based training in noticing distress signals, having supportive conversations, and responding helpfully rather than limiting such development to management or specialists. Peer support networks that leverage collective experience and wisdom rather than relying solely on professional expertise. Communities of practice where people share challenges and effective approaches to providing compassionate support. Continuous learning systems that capture lessons from compassion successes and failures to inform ongoing improvement. Retail organizations have trained frontline supervisors to provide immediate support rather than requiring employees to navigate corporate HR systems during crises. Supervisors receive authority to approve short-term schedule adjustments, access small emergency funds, and make other accommodations within defined parameters. This distributed model enables rapid response while maintaining appropriate oversight through reporting and review mechanisms that identify patterns warranting broader attention. Manufacturing companies have developed peer support programs where production employees receive training to recognize colleague distress and provide initial assistance. These peer compassion champions don't replace professional resources but offer accessible first-line support, a concerned conversation, connection to resources, temporary work coverage, that may address many situations while escalating others appropriately. The programs work because peer supporters understand the specific challenges and culture of production environments better than corporate staff and offer support without the perceived risk of reporting to management. The sustainability of distributed compassion depends on ongoing investment rather than one-time training. People need refresher development, opportunities to practice skills, and reinforcement that compassionate behavior receives organizational validation. Without such sustained attention, Initial enthusiasm may fade as competing demands dominate attention and compassion becomes somebody else's responsibility once again. Purpose and organizational identity. Enduring compassion capacity may require connecting to organizational purpose beyond profit generation. Research on meaningful work suggests that people sustain effort more effectively when they understand how their work contributes to valued outcomes beyond financial returns, or Benevenidal 2022. Organizations whose purpose incorporates explicit commitment to human flourishing may find compassion more natural to integrate and maintain. Purpose-compassion connections include *Mission articulation *. Organizational missions that articulate human impact, the people served, problems addressed, or needs met, rather than focusing exclusively on products, services, or financial objectives. Story and narrative emphasizing how the organization contributes to human well-being, providing emotional resonance that abstract business goals may lack. Values hierarchies that position human considerations alongside or above financial performance, signaling that profits represent means to meaningful ends rather than ends themselves. Communication consistently reinforcing purpose connections rather than allowing day-to-day operational focus to obscure larger meaning. Identity integration Recruitment and selection emphasizing cultural fit with compassionate values, bringing people intrinsically motivated by such environments rather than relying solely on training to instill compassion. Socialization practices that establish compassion as aspect of organizational identity, who we are rather than merely what we do. Recognition and celebration highlighting examples where people lived organizational compassion values, reinforcing desired identity and culture. Exit processes that maintain compassionate treatment of departing employees, demonstrating that organizational compassion extends to all transitions rather than only valued insiders. Stakeholder inclusion Definition of organizational success incorporating employee well-being alongside customer satisfaction, shareholder returns, and other traditional metrics. Stakeholder engagement practices that gather employee perspective on organizational compassion and incorporate feedback into ongoing improvement. Transparency regarding well-being challenges and organizational responses, demonstrating authentic commitment rather than maintaining idealized appearances. Long-term orientation that values sustained organizational health over extracting maximum short-term performance at the expense of people or culture. Healthcare organizations possess intrinsic purpose connections given their care missions. Many healthcare systems articulate that compassionate treatment of staff enables compassionate patient care. They cannot expect employees to provide empathetic care if the organization treats them without empathy. This explicit connection may help sustain investment in staff well-being even during financial pressure because it links directly to core institutional purpose rather than representing separate HR concern. Education institutions similarly connect staff well-being to core mission. Schools and universities increasingly recognize that educator well-being influences student learning and development. Teachers experiencing excessive stress or inadequate support may have reduced capacity for the patient, individualized attention that effective teaching requires. This mission connection provides rationale for well-being investment beyond abstract employee satisfaction. Commercial organizations may find purpose-compassion connections less obvious but increasingly important for attracting and retaining people who seek meaningful work. Some companies articulate purpose around solving customer problems or improving lives through their products and services, then connect employee well-being to mission fulfillment. They cannot deliver on customer commitments without engaged, healthy teams. While perhaps less immediately compelling than healthcare or education missions, such connections may still provide meaningful purpose that supports compassion investment. Conclusion. Organizational compassion represents both moral imperative and practical necessity in contemporary work environments. Evidence suggests that compassionate cultures influence multiple outcomes important to organizations: engagement, retention, innovation capacity, while significantly affecting employee well-being. As workforce expectations evolve and well-being challenges intensify, organizations that develop authentic compassion capacity may gain advantages in talent competition and organizational resilience. The interventions outlined here provide practical starting points. Leadership development that builds compassion skills and models supportive behavior establishes crucial cultural signals. Psychological safety initiatives create conditions where people can acknowledge struggles and seek support. Team practices that normalize mutual assistance operationalize compassion in daily work. Organizational policies and systems that enable flexible, supportive responses provide infrastructure supporting individual compassion intentions. Prevention of compassion fatigue ensures sustainability of support capacity. However, sustainable compassion requires integration into organizational strategy, governance, and identity rather than remaining peripheral HR concern. Organizations must examine whether resource allocation, performance management, and decision-making truly reflect stated compassion commitments or whether competing pressures consistently override such values. This integration challenge represents perhaps the most significant implementation barrier, maintaining compassion focus when short-term financial, operational, or competitive pressures create apparent tensions with supportive practices. Several considerations warrant continued attention. The research base, while growing, remains limited particularly regarding specific intervention effectiveness and optimal implementation approaches. Organizations should approach compassion initiatives with appropriate humility, implementing thoughtfully, gathering feedback, and adjusting based on experience rather than assuming any particular approach will automatically succeed. Boundary questions deserve ongoing reflection. Organizations can create supportive environments while recognizing limits of workplace compassion. Some challenges require professional intervention beyond colleague or manager capacity. Clarity about what organizations can and should provide versus what exceeds appropriate workplace scope helps prevent both inadequate support and inappropriate expansion of organizational roles into personal domains. Cultural variation matters. Approaches developed in particular national or organizational contexts may not transfer seamlessly. Organizations must adapt compassion practices to their specific circumstances, workforce characteristics, and cultural norms rather than implementing generic programs. What works in healthcare may differ from effective approaches in manufacturing, technology, or professional services. The ultimate measure involves whether organizations create environments where people can bring their whole selves to work, including vulnerabilities, struggles, and needs for support, without fear of judgment or penalty, and whether organizations respond with genuine, helpful support rather than abstract concern. This standard requires ongoing organizational commitment, resource investment, and cultural reinforcement. For practitioners, the path forward involves starting somewhere rather than waiting for perfect conditions or complete programs. Small changes in leadership behavior, team norms, or policies can begin building compassion capacity. The key involves authentic commitment, ensuring that compassion represents genuine organizational priority reflected in decisions, resources, and consequences rather than aspirational language contradicted by actual practice. Organizations that make this commitment and sustain it through inevitable challenges may create workplaces where both people and performance genuinely thrive.